I lived 22 years as a shadow cast out from the village marked as tainted. Then one day the Wolf King looked at me and saw not a threat, but the key to his pack's survival. The moonlight cast long shadows through the ancient pines of Silver Ridge. A young woman ran through the underbrush, her breath coming in ragged gasps that crystallized in the cold Montana air. Eleanor Grey had always been fast, but tonight she needed to be faster. The hunting party was gaining ground. There she is, the witch girl. Torchlight flickered through the trees behind her. Eleanor pushed herself harder, ignoring the burning in her lungs and the sting of branches slashing across her face. Her long brown hair had come loose from its practical braid, whipping behind her like a banner that only made her easier to track. Don't let her reach the boundary stones. Eleanor knew these woods better than anyone. She had spent her life as an outcast, finding solace in the wilderness, where the judgmental stares of the village couldn't reach her. Now that knowledge was her only chance at survival. The voice that narrated this memory wasn't the frightened whisper of a young woman in peril. It was deeper, weathered by time, carrying the weight of decades. I was 22 then, spoke Eleanor now, 70 years old, her voice strong despite the years that had passed. Running for my life because a child had fallen ill and they needed someone to blame. The scene shifted, dissolving like mist at dawn. An old woman with silver-streaked hair sat before a crackling fire surrounded by eager young faces. Her amber eyes, unusual and striking, even in her advanced age, reflected the dancing flames. This story begins with fear, as most important ones do, she continued. But it's also about finding courage when you're certain you have none left. About discovering that what marks you as different might be your greatest strength. Young Eleanor crested a hill, her lungs burning. Ahead lay Salvation, a line of ancient stones marking the boundary between village lands and the forbidden territory owned by the reclusive Blackwood family. No villager dared cross those stones, not even to chase a suspected witch. She leapt over the boundary marker just as a rock whistled past her ear. Landing hard on the other side, she tumbled down a short embankment, coming to rest against the gnarled roots of an oak. The hunting party halted at the stones, their torches illuminating, faces twisted with superstition and fear. "This isn't over, witch girl," called the leader, a burly man whose hatred of Eleanor stemmed from the time she'd refused his advances years before. "You can't hide in those woods forever." But Eleanor knew better. She had just traded one danger for another. The villagers feared these woods for good reason. The Blackwoods were not ordinary landowners. Rumors of wolves the size of horses of men who could change their skin under the full moon kept most sane people far from this forest. "My life as I knew it ended that night," the elder Eleanor told her audience, her weathered hands cupping a mug of steaming tea, "and my true life began." The young woman made her way deeper into the forest, moving cautiously now. The distant shouts of the hunting party faded, replaced by the natural symphony of the night woods. An owl called overhead. The wind whispered secrets through the pine needles. Eleanor felt her racing heart begin to slow. She had nowhere to go. Her small cabin at the edge of the village was surely being ransacked even now. Everything her grandfather had taught her about herbs and healing, all her carefully dried plants and tinctures, would be destroyed as evidence of witchcraft. Marcus Grey had raised Eleanor after her parents died in a flash flood when she was just 5 years old. A former soldier turned healer, he had taught her everything he knew about surviving in a world that feared what it didn't understand. "Trust your instincts, Ellie," he would say, his voice gravelly from years of smoking his pipe. "True strength isn't in muscles or teeth or claws, it's in here." He would tap his temple with a weathered finger. "Experience and knowledge. Those are weapons nobody can take from you." Eleanor touched the crescent-shaped birthmark on her wrist, tracing its familiar outline. It was this mark, along with her unusual amber eyes, that had first set her apart in a village that feared differences. Marcus had told her to be proud of these distinctions, but he had also taught her to hide them when necessary. "Your birthmark is not a curse," he had insisted. "The Grey family carries the blood of ancient guardians. One day you'll understand what that means." But Marcus had died 5 years ago, taking his secrets to the grave, leaving Eleanor alone to face a village growing increasingly hostile toward her unusual talents for healing wounds and easing pain. A sudden cry pierced the night, jolting Eleanor from her memories. Not human, but animal, filled with such suffering that it made her stop in her tracks. The sound came again, weaker this time, followed by tiny mewling noises that tugged at something deep in her chest. Sometimes you have to break the rules to find where you truly belong. Marcus had told her once. Eleanor knew she was already deep in forbidden territory. Whatever was making those sounds was likely dangerous. The sensible choice would be to continue on to find shelter for the night and figure out her next move come daylight. Instead, she turned toward the sound. The cries led her to a small clearing bathed in moonlight. There beside a fallen log lay a magnificent gray wolf, her silver coat stained dark with blood. Even in death, the animal radiated a nobility that spoke of something beyond ordinary wildlife. But it was the three tiny forms huddled against the wolf's cooling body that stopped Eleanor's breath. Pups newborn, by the look of them, their eyes still sealed shut, their small bodies trembling with cold and weakness. One was black as midnight, another pale as winter frost, and the third bore markings of amber that reminded Eleanor of her own unusual eyes. "They were dying," Elder Eleanor said softly, her gaze distant with memory. "I could feel their life force ebbing away with every tiny breath." Young Eleanor knelt beside them, her herbal knowledge already assessing, already knowing it wouldn't be enough. Without their mother's milk and warmth, these pups had perhaps an hour left. She gently picked up the smallest one, the amber-marked pup, feeling its feeble heartbeat against her palm. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes for these innocent creatures caught in nature's cruel cycle. The sound of hoofbeats made Eleanor freeze. Voices approached, cultured and refined, accompanied by the jingling of expensive bridles and the soft laughter of people who had never known true hardship. Eleanor could have hidden, should have hidden. Instead, she stood, the small pup still cradled in her hands. A riding party entered the clearing, led by a woman whose beauty was as cold as a winter sunrise. Victoria Stone sat astride a white mare, her platinum blonde hair perfectly arranged despite her morning ride. At 35, she possessed the kind of icy elegance that belonged in the pages of high-fashion magazines, not the wilds of Montana. Her riding habit was cut from the finest materials, deep green with silver buttons that caught the moonlight. Behind her rode several other well-dressed figures, their faces flushed with exertion and expensive brandy. "Please," Eleanor called out, desperation making her bold. "I need help. This wolf has died giving birth. Her pups are dying too." Victoria's gaze swept over Eleanor with the disinterest of someone examining an insect. Her cold blue eyes lingered on Eleanor's simple clothing, now torn and dirty from her flight through the forest, before moving to the dead wolf and her failing offspring. "Dead animals are no concern of mine," Victoria said, her voice carrying the crisp accent of someone who had spent more time in European boarding schools than American wilderness. "I have more pressing matters to attend to. The Silverbrook Estate is hosting a delightful brunch, and I refuse to be late for such an occasion." "But they're just babies," Eleanor pleaded, gesturing toward the pups. "Surely a few moments of your time." "I said no." Victoria's voice cut through Eleanor's words like a blade. "Find someone else to clean up nature's messes. I have a reputation to maintain." With that, she spurred her horse forward, her entourage following in a rustle of expensive fabric and entitled laughter. One younger rider glanced back with what might have been sympathy, but none of them stopped. Eleanor stood alone once more, the dying pup cradled against her chest, fury and despair warring within her. "Heartless witch," she muttered, then immediately felt guilty for the harsh words. She knelt again beside the other pups, gathering all three against her body, trying to share what warmth she could. Their fur was softer than anything she'd ever touched, but she could feel how thin they were, how their small bones pressed against her palms like fragile twigs ready to snap. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know how to save you." That was when it happened. A strange warmth began to build in her chest, spreading outward through her arms and into her hands. Eleanor gasped, nearly dropping the pups in surprise. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced, like sunlight flowing through her veins. Her hands began to glow with a soft golden light. Eleanor stared in shock, certain she must be hallucinating from exhaustion and grief. But the glow remained pulsing gently in rhythm with her heartbeat, and beneath her glowing hands something impossible was happening. The pups' breathing began to deepen and strengthen. Color returned to their tiny noses and paw pads. The smallest one, the amber-marked pup, let out a tiny yip of protest as strength flowed back into its small body. The crescent birthmark on Eleanor's wrist pulsed with an inner light of its own burning, not with pain but with a strange intoxicating power that flowed through her like liquid gold. The Grey bloodline carries old magic, her grandfather's voice whispered through her memory. Ancient gifts from the time when humans and wolves walked as equals under the moon's blessing. But such gifts come with a price, and the world has grown cruel to those who bear them. As the pups stirred to full, healthy life beneath her touch, Eleanor finally understood what her grandfather had meant. His stories hadn't been mere tales after all. The golden light faded slowly, leaving Eleanor drained but exhilarated. The pups, now vigorous and alert, began to squirm in her arms, making small sounds of hunger and confusion. Impossibly, their eyes had opened, revealing colors that defied nature's silver for the black pup, ice blue for the white one, and molten gold for the smallest with amber markings. "This isn't possible," Eleanor breathed. Wolf pups weren't supposed to open their eyes for weeks. But as she spoke the words, she knew she was lying to herself. Nothing about this situation was natural. The power that had flowed through her hands, the way the dying pups had responded to her touch, the strange heat that now seemed to live beneath her skin, all of it pointed to one terrifying conclusion: magic. Eleanor looked down at the pups, who were now attempting to crawl up her arms, their movements already stronger and more coordinated than should have been possible for newborns. "Midnight," she said suddenly, the name rising unbidden as she looked at the black pup with the silver eyes. "Frost." She continued, her gaze shifting to the pale one with ice blue eyes. "And you," she said, lifting the golden-eyed pup closer to her face. "You're Amber." The names felt right, as if they had always belonged to these creatures. The pups seemed to approve as well, each one responding to their given name with soft sounds of contentment. As morning light began to filter through the trees, Eleanor watched in amazement as the pups grew visibly stronger and larger. By midday, they were the size of month-old puppies, and by afternoon, they were attempting to stand on legs that should not have supported them for weeks yet. Every time she touched them, Eleanor could feel her healing power responding, accelerating their natural development in ways that defied everything she knew about biology. The magic flowed through her like honey through warm stones, sweet and natural and terrifyingly powerful. Eleanor knew she needed shelter. The forest was vast, but she couldn't wander indefinitely with 3 rapidly growing wolf pups. The villagers would never welcome her back. She was truly alone now, except for these 3 impossible creatures that fate had placed in her care. "I'll protect you," she promised the pups as they curled against her for a nap. "Somehow we'll figure this out together." She didn't know then how prophetic those words would prove to be. The sound of someone approaching made Eleanor tense, reaching for a branch to use as a weapon. The pups sensed her alarm, huddling closer, their small bodies already protective of their savior. An elderly man emerged from the trees, leaning heavily on a carved wooden staff. His white hair and beard were neatly trimmed, his clothing practical but well-made. Deep lines etched his face, speaking of a life fully lived, but his blue eyes were sharp and clear beneath bushy white brows. "At last," he said, his voice surprisingly strong for a man who appeared to be in his 70s. "A true guardian after all these years." Eleanor rose to her feet, positioning herself between the stranger and the pups. "Who are you?" "William Reed," the old man replied, inclining his head slightly. "Advisor to the Blackwood family for more decades than I care to count." His gaze fell to the pups, then to the golden light still faintly visible around Eleanor's hands. "I've been waiting 50 years to meet a true guardian. Now I fear our time is short." "I don't understand," Eleanor said, though something deep within her responded to the word guardian, as if recognizing a truth she had always known. William's weathered face softened. "No, I suppose you wouldn't. Your grandfather should have told you more, prepared you better." Eleanor stiffened. "You knew my grandfather?" William nodded, a shadow of old grief passing across his features. "Marcus Grey and I fought together in a war most people have forgotten. He was my friend." The old man's gaze sharpened. "And now it seems his granddaughter has inherited the family gift just as he feared." "These pups," Eleanor began, glancing down at the 3 creatures who now watched William with intelligent curiosity. "They're not ordinary wolves, are they?" "No," William said simply. "They are the offspring of Celine, the royal companion to Alpha Ethan Blackwood." He sighed heavily. "And he is returning today from diplomatic negotiations with other packs. When he discovers Celine dead and her pups missing, the implication hung in the air between them." "I found them dying," Eleanor said defensively. "I tried to get help, but that woman on the white horse, Victoria, she refused." "Victoria Stone," William's voice hardened. Ethan's fiancée. A political match, not one of heart. He shook his head. Her refusal doesn't surprise me, though her cruelty may interest Ethan. Eleanor felt the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. What will he do when he finds out I took the pups? That depends entirely on you, Miss Grey, William said. You have two choices before you. You can leave these lands and never return, taking the pups with you. They are bonded to you now. They would follow. Or, he paused, studying her face. You can stay and face your destiny. My destiny, Eleanor repeated skeptically. William gestured to the crescent birthmark on her wrist, now faintly glowing in the deepening twilight. The mark of the Guardian. For generations, the Grey family and the Blackwood pack were allies bound by ancient oaths, guardians and alphas working in harmony to protect both worlds. That alliance was broken during the pack wars 30 years ago. Many thought the Guardian line had died out entirely. Eleanor thought of her grandfather's cryptic warnings, his insistence that her birthmark was a blessing, not a curse. Marcus never told me any of this. He was trying to protect you, William said gently. After what happened to your parents? My parents died in a flood, Eleanor interrupted. William's expression grew sad. Is that what Marcus told you? Oh, my dear, there is so much you don't know. A distant howl cut through the gathering darkness, followed by another, and then a chorus that made the hair on Eleanor's arms stand on end. The pups at her feet responded instantly, their small heads tilting back as they attempted to join the song with their puppy voices. He's returned, William said, his expression grave. Ethan has found Celine's body. The hunt will begin soon. What hunt? Eleanor asked, though she already suspected the answer. For whoever is responsible for his companion's death. For her missing pups. William fixed her with a steady gaze. You must decide quickly, Eleanor Grey. Run or face what comes. Eleanor thought of her grandfather's words echoing from her childhood. Running only prolongs fear. Facing it ends it. Before she could respond, the three pups suddenly grew agitated. They circled restlessly, whining and pawing at the ground. Their bodies seemed to quiver with an energy that hadn't been there moments before. What's happening to them? Eleanor asked, alarmed by their behavior. William watched with a mixture of awe and concern. They sensed their alpha. The blood bond calls to them. Midnight, the largest pup suddenly raced to the edge of the small clearing where Eleanor had made their temporary camp. Frost and Amber quickly followed their small bodies, moving with a coordination that belied their youth. Wait, Eleanor called, rushing after them, but it was too late. The pups burst through the underbrush, their powerful legs carrying them swiftly away from her. They were heading north toward the heart of Blackwood territory. Eleanor turned to William, panic rising in her chest. I have to go after them. They're answering the call of their true master, William said. You cannot stop them now. But they need me, Eleanor insisted. They're still too young, too vulnerable. William studied her for a long moment. Are you certain it's not you who needs them? When Eleanor didn't answer, he nodded as if confirming something to himself. So, you've made your choice. I haven't chosen anything, Eleanor protested. Haven't you? William's eyes were kind, but knowing. The path of the Guardian is never easy, Eleanor Grey, but perhaps it is time for the old alliances to be renewed. The sound of approaching riders cut through the darkening forest. Hoofbeats, the jingle of weapons, the low murmur of trained men moving with purpose. Blackwood's guards, William confirmed, straightening his posture and adjusting his grip on his staff. They've picked up the pups' trail, which will lead them directly to us. Eleanor felt trapped between impossible choices, her mind racing to find an escape that wouldn't involve abandoning the pups she had saved. 6 riders appeared at the edge of the clearing, led by a man whose very presence commanded attention. Captain Michael Hart sat tall in the saddle, his weathered face bearing the scars of battles long past. At 45, he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. His pale blue eyes missed nothing as they swept over the scene, lingering on Eleanor with suspicion before moving to William with surprise. Master Reed, Hart acknowledged, his voice gruff with respect. We didn't expect to find you out here. Life is full of surprises, Michael, William replied mildly. Like finding 3 royal wolf pups racing back home without their mother. Hart's expression darkened. We're tracking whoever took them. Alpha Blackwood wants answers. And he shall have them, William said. Miss Grey here has quite a story to tell. All eyes turned to Eleanor, who fought the urge to shrink back from their scrutiny. She lifted her chin instead, drawing on a courage she hadn't known she possessed. Miss Grey is my guest. William continued his tone, making it clear this was not open for debate. She will accompany us to the estate to speak with Ethan directly. Hart's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. As you wish, Master Reed. But she rides with me where I can watch her. William stepped closer to Hart's horse, his voice dropping so only the captain could hear. She is not what you think, Michael. She is something far more valuable. Alpha will want her treated with respect. Hart looked skeptical, but gave a short nod. He extended a hand down to Eleanor. Come, Miss Grey. Your presence is required at Blackwood Manor. Eleanor hesitated, looking to William for reassurance. Remember what your grandfather taught you, the old man said softly. Trust your instincts. Eleanor took a deep breath and placed her hand in Hart's, allowing him to pull her up behind him on the horse. What's so special about her that has you playing protector? Old man Hart asked William, his voice low with curiosity. She's just a village girl. William smiled enigmatically as he mounted another guard's offered horse. Some questions are better answered in time, Captain. This is one of them. As the party began the journey toward Blackwood Manor, Eleanor watched the forest pass by in the gathering darkness. Somewhere ahead, 3 wolf pups raced towards a destiny that seemed inexorably linked with her own. I didn't know then what awaited me, Elder Eleanor told her rapt audience, the firelight playing across her lined face. I only knew that for the first time in my life, I was following a path that felt right even as it terrified me. She looked down at her wrist where the crescent-shaped birthmark still showed faintly against her aged skin. Sometimes the things we fear most about ourselves are the very things the world needs most from us. The young faces surrounding her leaned closer, eager for what would come next in her tale. That night, she continued, her amber eyes reflecting memories of both joy and pain. I entered the world of the Blackwoods, not knowing if I faced my end or my beginning. What I discovered there would change everything I thought I knew about myself, about my family's legacy, and about the man they called the Alpha King. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the room, as Eleanor Grey, once outcast and now revered, continued the story of how a village healer became the last guardian. The story of how she saved a pack, found her purpose, and in the process might have saved herself. Blackwood Manor rose from the Montana wilderness like something from another age. Massive walls of dark granite stretched toward the star-filled sky windows, glowing with amber light against the gathering night. Turrets and towers spoke of old wealth of a family whose roots ran deeper than the newly formed nation that surrounded them. Eleanor Grey sat stiffly behind Captain Hart as they approached the imposing iron gates. Her hands trembled slightly, and she clasped them tightly together to hide her fear. The 3 wolf pups had outpaced the riding party, disappearing into the darkness ahead like smoke on the wind. Some say this land belonged to the Blackwoods before America even had a name, William Reed remarked, riding alongside them. His voice carried the comfortable cadence of a storyteller who had shared these tales many times before. They came from the old country, following something that called to their blood. The gates swung open silently as they approached, operated by unseen hands. Beyond lay a sweeping courtyard of cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of use. Torches blazed in iron brackets, casting dancing shadows across the ancient stones. Guards stood at attention, their faces impassive but alert. Eleanor felt their eyes tracking her, assessing the potential threat she represented. She straightened her spine, refusing to be cowed despite her torn clothing and disheveled appearance. The Alpha will want to see her immediately, Hart said as they dismounted. He reached up to help Eleanor down from the horse, his grip firm but not unkind. The Alpha will want facts before judgment. William corrected, his blue eyes twinkling with an authority that belied his advanced age. Miss Grey has had quite an ordeal. She requires a moment to compose herself. Hart's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. Very well, 1 hour. Then I escort her to the Alpha's study, with or without you, old man. William smiled. Your courtesy is appreciated, Michael. As Hart stalked away, Eleanor turned to William with wide eyes. An hour? What am I supposed to do in an hour? These people think I stole those pups. They might even think I killed their mother. These people, William replied gently, have lived alongside magic and mystery for generations. They know there is more to this world than most humans can comprehend. He gestured toward a side entrance. Come, there's something you need to see before you meet Ethan. William led Eleanor through corridors lined with tapestries depicting great hunts and battles. Ancient weapons hung on the walls alongside portraits of stern-faced men and women whose eyes seemed to follow them as they passed. The Blackwood lineage, William explained, noticing Eleanor's gaze lingering on a particularly striking portrait of a man with piercing gray eyes. Alphas and their mates stretching back 16 generations on American soil. They came at last to a heavy oak door bound with iron bands that spoke of both decoration and security. William produced an ornate key from within his coat and turned it in the lock. The family archive, he said, pushing the door open to reveal a vast circular room. Few outside the bloodline are permitted entry. Eleanor stepped into a space that stole her breath. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls filled with ancient books, scrolls, and artifacts that spoke of centuries of collected knowledge. A massive oak table dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with maps and documents. But it was what hung above the great stone fireplace that drew Eleanor's full attention. A painting larger than life depicting two figures standing side by side against a backdrop of mountains and forest. One was clearly a Blackwood ancestor, tall and proud, with the same distinctive gray eyes that marked the current Alpha. Beside him stood a woman with amber eyes and a crescent mark clearly visible on her wrist. Between them, three wolves sat at attention, their poses suggesting both wildness and loyalty. The First Alliance, William said softly. Jeremiah Blackwood and Sarah Grey, 1723. The beginning of the pact between Guardians and Alphas. Eleanor stared at the painting, her mind struggling to process what this meant. My family, we've been connected to the Blackwoods for centuries. William nodded, moving to a glass case near the table. The Grey family carried ancient magic in their bloodline passed down from mother to daughter, occasionally appearing in the sons. The ability to heal, to strengthen the bond between human and wolf, to maintain balance between the natural world and the supernatural one. He carefully opened the case and removed a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. Your grandfather wasn't just my friend Eleanor. He was a guardian like his father before him and like you are now. Eleanor shook her head, overwhelmed by revelations that challenged everything she had believed about herself and her family. But if my grandfather was a guardian, why did he hide it from me? Why raise me in that village among people who feared and hated us? William's weathered face grew somber. Because 30 years ago, something happened that shattered the alliance. The Pack Wars. He gestured for Eleanor to sit at the table, placing the journal before her. This is Marcus's account of those days. I suggest you read quickly. Your hour grows short. Eleanor opened the journal with trembling fingers, recognizing her grandfather's neat, precise handwriting. She began to read, and as the words flowed across the page, it was as though she could hear his voice once more. June 12, 1992. The unthinkable has happened. Richard Blackwood is dead, murdered by his own brother Thomas in a coup that has thrown the pack into chaos. As Guardian, I tried to intervene to maintain the peace that has existed between our families for generations. I failed. Thomas refuses to acknowledge the ancient pact. He claims the time of Guardians has passed, that science and modern weapons provide all the protection the pack requires. Worse, he has begun hunting those of us with the old magic, claiming we represent a threat to his new order. My beloved wife Catherine is dead, killed while trying to protect a group of children during Thomas's attack on the Guardian Sanctuary. Our daughter Elizabeth and her husband Robert have fled with their child, my granddaughter Eleanor. The birthmark is already visible on the child's wrist. The gray magic runs strong in her. I dare not write where they have gone. These pages might fall into enemy hands. I can only pray that they find safety far from Blackwood territory, and that someday when Eleanor comes of age, the alliance might be restored. Eleanor looked up from the journal, her vision blurred with tears. My parents didn't die in a flood, she whispered. They were murdered. William nodded gravely. Thomas Blackwood's reign of terror lasted 5 years. By the time Ethan was old enough to challenge his uncle for leadership, most of the Guardians had been killed or had gone into hiding. Your parents managed to escape with you, but they were tracked down when you were 5. And my grandfather found me, Eleanor said, pieces of her past falling into place with terrible clarity. He took me to that village, changed our names. He protected you the only way he knew how. William confirmed, by hiding you in plain sight in a place so ordinary that Thomas would never think to look. Eleanor touched the crescent birthmark on her wrist, feeling the echo of power that had saved the wolf pups. And now, what happens now? Before William could answer, the door to the archive swung open. Captain Hart stood in the doorway, his expression hard. "Time's up," he announced. "The Alpha has returned from the burial grounds. He demands to see the girl immediately." William rose with the dignity of his years. "She is not the girl, Michael. She is Eleanor Grey, last of the Guardian bloodline, and she will be treated with the respect her position demands." Hart's eyes widened slightly at the revelation, his gaze moving to Eleanor with new assessment. "Guardian, there hasn't been a confirmed Guardian in decades. And yet here she stands," William replied. "Now shall we keep the Alpha waiting, or shall we proceed with the courtesy this moment in history deserves?" Hart stepped aside, gesturing for them to follow. Eleanor rose on unsteady legs, her mind racing with all she had learned in the past hour. As she passed the portrait of Sarah Grey and Jeremiah Blackwood, she felt an odd kinship with the woman whose blood flowed in her veins. The Alpha's study occupied the eastern tower of Blackwood Manor, a circular room with windows that overlooked the vast forest stretching toward distant mountains. Like the archive, it was lined with books and maps, but these showed signs of regular use rather than preservation. A massive desk of polished oak dominated one side of the space, while a fireplace large enough to roast a deer blazed opposite. Ethan Blackwood stood with his back to the door, staring into the flames. At 30, he carried himself with the weight of authority that came from both birth and battle. His broad shoulders filled out a black shirt that had been tailored to accommodate his powerful frame, and when he turned to face them, Eleanor felt her breath catch. His eyes were not the gray of his ancestors in the portraits. They were a pale Arctic blue that seemed to glow with an inner light. A scar ran along his left jawline, a reminder of the battle that had won him his position as Alpha. His dark hair was longer than fashion dictated, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. But it was the raw grief and rage in his expression that struck Eleanor most forcefully. This was a man who had just buried a beloved companion. "Captain," Ethan acknowledged Hart with a curt nod before his gaze settled on Eleanor. His nostrils flared slightly, and Eleanor knew he was taking in her scent, cataloging her as friend or foe. "This is the one found near where Celine died." "Yes, Alpha," Hart confirmed. "Master Reed insisted on bringing her directly to you." Ethan's gaze shifted to William, some of the hardness leaving his expression. "Old friend, your presence during this time is appreciated." William inclined his head. "My condolences for your loss, Ethan. Celine was a magnificent companion. She deserved better than to die alone in the woods," Ethan said, grief roughening his voice. He turned his attention back to Eleanor. "Tell me, Miss Grey." Eleanor supplied her voice steadier than she had expected. "Eleanor Grey." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes at her name, too quick to interpret. "Tell me, Miss Grey, what you were doing in my forest with my wolves." Eleanor squared her shoulders, drawing on courage she hadn't known she possessed. "I was gathering herbs at the boundary of the forest when I heard sounds of distress. I found your wolf Celine already dead. She had given birth, but the pups were dying in the cold. And you decided to take matters into your own hands." Ethan's voice carried a dangerous edge. "I tried to get help," Eleanor countered. "Your fiancée, Victoria Stone, rode by with her companions. I begged for assistance, but she refused. Said she had more important social engagements to attend to." Ethan's expression darkened. "Victoria was in the forest this morning." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, "on a white mare wearing a green riding habit. She looked directly at the dying pups and chose to do nothing." "An interesting accusation," came a melodious voice from the doorway. Victoria Stone glided into the study, her platinum hair now arranged in an elegant chignon, her slim figure showcased in a dress of deep emerald silk. "One might almost think you were trying to shift blame for your own actions." Victoria moved to Ethan's side, placing a possessive hand on his arm. "My love, I was nowhere near the northern forest this morning. Lady Silverbrook can confirm I was with her planning details for the engagement gala." Eleanor felt a surge of indignation. "That's not true. You were there. You looked right at me at the pups." "I've never seen this woman before in my life," Victoria stated coldly. "Though I've heard rumors of a wild girl who lives at the edge of the village, a suspected witch who deals in herbs and strange brews." Her blue eyes narrowed. Perhaps she killed your precious Celine for her magical concoctions and now seeks to blame others. Eleanor took a step forward, fury overriding caution. I would never harm an innocent creature. I tried to save those pups when you abandoned them to die. Enough, Ethan's voice cut through the tension, his authority palpable in the single word. Accusations without proof benefit no one. His gaze settled on Eleanor. You claim to have found the pups dying, yet my men report the scent of healthy wolf cubs in your dwelling. How do you explain this discrepancy? This was the moment Eleanor had dreaded, the moment when she would have to choose between her own safety and the truth of what she had become. She thought of her grandfather's sacrifice of the generations of Greys who had used their gift in service to the balance between worlds. They were healthy because I saved them, Eleanor said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed study. I have been blessed with the gift of healing. Victoria laughed, the sound like tinkling crystal. A witch, just as the villagers claim. Surely you don't believe such superstitious nonsense, Ethan. But Ethan's attention was fixed entirely on Eleanor, his expression unreadable. Prove it. William stepped forward. If I may, Alpha, there is someone who might serve as a suitable demonstration of Miss Grey's abilities. At Ethan's nod, William moved to the door and spoke quietly to a guard outside. Minutes later, an elderly man entered the study leaning heavily on a wooden cane. His weathered face spoke of decades of service, and his leg dragged noticeably as he made his painful way across the room. James Wilson, William introduced him, former captain of the Blackwood Guard, retired these past 20 years after taking a silver bullet in defense of your father. The old soldier bowed his head respectfully to Ethan. Alpha, it's an honor to be in your presence again. The honor is mine, Captain Wilson, Ethan replied, genuine warmth in his voice. Your service to my family has never been forgotten. William turned to Eleanor. James's wound never healed properly. Silver does that to those with wolf blood in their veins. It causes pain that no conventional medicine can fully address. Eleanor understood what was being asked of her. With all eyes in the room upon her, she approached the elderly soldier. May I? She asked gently. James looked to Ethan, who gave a slight nod. The old man extended his injured leg with evident discomfort. Eleanor knelt and placed her hands just above where she sensed the old wound must lie. Closing her eyes, she focused on the damaged tissues beneath her palms, on years of pain and limited mobility that had defined this man's existence for decades. The warmth began to build in her chest, spreading down through her arms and into her hands. Golden light began to seep between her fingers, soft at first, then growing stronger until it illuminated the entire study with its radiance. Eleanor could feel the damage beneath her hands. Muscle fibers torn and never properly healed, bone that had knit incorrectly, and at the core, tiny fragments of silver still embedded in the tissue, poisoning it from within. Her power flowed into these broken places, dissolving the silver, reuniting muscle, realigning bone. James gasped, his weathered face transforming with wonder as pain that had been his constant companion for 20 years simply melted away. When Eleanor finally pulled her hands back, the golden light fading slowly, the old soldier stared down at his leg in disbelief. Tentatively, he put his full weight on it, then took a step without his cane. Then another. The limp that had defined his gait for 2 decades was completely gone. Blessed mother of wolves, James breathed, tears streaming down his cheeks. I can walk without pain for the first time in 20 years. The study erupted in murmurs of amazement. Hart, who had been watching from the doorway, crossed himself reflexively. Even Victoria seemed momentarily speechless, her perfect composure cracking to reveal shock beneath. But Eleanor saw none of this. Her attention was fixed entirely on Ethan Blackwood, who was staring at her with an expression she couldn't begin to interpret. His blue eyes seemed to burn with inner fire, and his scent had changed subtly, carrying notes of cedar and wild herbs and something undefinably masculine. It was then that the doors to the study burst open with enough force to rattle the ancient hinges. Through them bounded 3 wolf pups, their coats gleaming with unnatural luster, their eyes bright with intelligence and joy. Midnight Frost and Amber had found their way to the heart of Blackwood territory, and they moved with the confidence of creatures returning home. The guards at the door made no move to stop them, too astonished by the sight of pups that should have been newborns, but were already the size of adolescent wolves. Eleanor expected them to go to Ethan. He was their rightful master, the alpha whose bloodline they carried. But as they approached, something unexpected happened. Instead of racing to Ethan's side, all three wolves skidded to a halt before Eleanor. Midnight pressed his black head against her hip, while Frost and Amber flanked her protectively. Their lips pulled back in silent snarls as they faced the assembled company. The message was unmistakable. These royal wolves, bred for generations to serve only the Alpha bloodline, had chosen a new master. They had chosen her. Eleanor looked up to meet Ethan's gaze across the length of the study, and in his arctic blue eyes she saw the exact moment when everything changed. Recognition flared between them like lightning, accompanied by something deeper, something that made her breath catch and her heart race. Impossible. Victoria breathed, her perfect composure finally cracking. Ethan seemed not to hear her. His voice when he spoke was rough with emotion and absolute authority. Clear the room. Everyone out, except Miss Grey. Hart began to protest. Alpha security protocols. Now, Captain. Ethan's tone left no room for argument. As the others filed out, William paused at the door, his wise old eyes moving between Eleanor and Ethan with knowing assessment. Remember the old text, Ethan, he said quietly. What was sundered can be made whole again. Then he too was gone, the heavy door closing behind him with a finality that seemed to seal Eleanor's fate. She stood alone with Ethan Blackwood, the last guardian facing the Alpha, with three impossibly advanced wolf pups sitting at her feet as if they had always belonged there. You're a Grey, Ethan said, finally breaking the charged silence. A true Grey, not just in name. Eleanor nodded. I only learned the full truth an hour ago. My grandfather, Marcus Grey, he hid our history from me, to protect me. From my uncle, Ethan's jaw tightened. Thomas Blackwood's crimes against your family are a stain on our honor that can never be fully erased. You weren't responsible for his actions, Eleanor said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I am Alpha, Ethan countered. The pack's sins are mine to bear, its debts mine to repay. He studied her with those intense blue eyes. I never thought I'd see a guardian in my lifetime. Most believed the bloodline had ended with Marcus. He kept me hidden, Eleanor explained. Changed our name slightly, moved us to that village where no one would think to look for descendants of an ancient magical lineage. A wise strategy, Ethan acknowledged, though it seems it came at great cost to you. Eleanor thought of the years of isolation, of suspicious glances and whispered accusations. I survived, she said simply. More than survived, Ethan replied, his gaze dropping to the three wolves at her feet. You thrived enough to manifest the guardian gift when it was most needed. A shadow of grief passed over his features. Celine was more than a companion to me. She was the last link to my father to the pack, as it was before Thomas tore everything apart. I'm sorry I couldn't save her, Eleanor said softly. I tried, but she was already gone. But you saved her legacy, Ethan gestured to the pups. And in doing so, perhaps you've saved more than you know. He moved closer, and Eleanor felt a strange tugging sensation in her chest, as if an invisible thread connected them and was now pulling taut. The three wolves watched him approach, but made no move to intercept, sensing no threat in their Alpha's advance. There's something else happening here, Ethan said, his voice dropping to a register that seemed to resonate in Eleanor's very bones. Something neither of us expected. What do you mean, Eleanor asked, though some deep instinctive part of her already knew the answer. The mate bond, Ethan said simply, the connection that forms between true partners, transcending choice or circumstance. He held up a hand as Eleanor began to protest. I can feel it forming between us. So can you, if you are honest with yourself. Eleanor wanted to deny it, to reject the very idea as impossible. She had known this man for less than an hour, yet she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him, the sense of rightness that had settled over her from the moment their eyes had met. But Victoria, she said instead. Your engagement, a political arrangement, Ethan cut her off, negotiated by the elders to strengthen our alliance with the Stone family. There was never any question of a mate bond. He took another step closer, close enough now that Eleanor could feel the heat radiating from his body, could inhale his scent of pine and wilderness and power. The old texts speak of this, he continued, his voice low and intense. When a guardian and an alpha form a mate bond, it strengthens both, creates a balance of power that benefits the entire pack. I've only just learned what being a guardian means, Eleanor protested. I can't possibly. The study door flew open once more, this time revealing Victoria Stone, her perfect features contorted with rage. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, storming into the room. "Sending me away like some common servant while you confer with this hedge witch?" Ethan's expression hardened. "This discussion does not concern you, Victoria." "Doesn't concern me?" Victoria's voice rose dangerously. "I am to be your wife in 3 weeks' time. Everything about you concerns me." Eleanor felt the wolves at her feet tensing, responding to the hostile tone. Midnight's silver eyes tracked Victoria's every movement, his young body already showing the protective instincts of an adult guardian. "The engagement was arranged by the elders, not by choice," Ethan replied, his tone measured but firm. "And circumstances have changed significantly in the past hour." Victoria's gaze darted between Ethan and Eleanor, comprehension dawning in her cold blue eyes. "No," she breathed. "You cannot possibly be suggesting that this nobody, this village witch, is your mate." "I'm suggesting nothing," Ethan replied. "I'm stating a fact. The mate bond has begun to form. Any wolf in the pack would sense it." "This is absurd." Victoria's perfect composure had completely shattered. "I am Victoria Stone. My family has power, connections, wealth. What does she bring except trouble and outdated magic tricks?" "She brings balance," came William Reed's voice from the doorway. The elderly advisor had returned, his expression grave as he surveyed the scene. "The very thing this pack has lacked for 30 years. Victoria whirled to face him. "Stay out of this, old man. Your time of influence is long past." William entered the study calmly, unperturbed by her venom. "I have served 3 generations of Blackwood Alphas, Miss Stone. I will likely not live to serve a 4th. But while I draw breath, I will speak truth to power, as is my duty and my right." He turned to Ethan. "The mate bond with a guardian is sacred, Alpha. It transcends political arrangements and cannot be denied without grave consequences to both parties." "This is insanity," Victoria hissed. "My father will never stand for this insult." "Your father is a businessman, Brajon," William replied mildly. "He understands that circumstances change and agreements must sometimes be renegotiated." Victoria's face flushed with fury. "You'll regret this," she promised, her gaze locking with Eleanor's. "All of you." With that, she stormed from the room, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering in her wake like a toxic cloud. That, William observed dryly, went about as well as could be expected. "She'll cause problems," Ethan said, his expression troubled. "Undoubtedly," William agreed, "but those are concerns for tomorrow. Tonight there are more pressing matters to address." He turned to Eleanor. "The awakening of a guardian's powers is just the beginning. You'll need training, guidance, protection while you learn to control what's been unleashed." Eleanor looked down at the 3 wolves still pressed protectively against her legs. "And them, they've grown so quickly, developed so rapidly. Is that normal?" "Nothing about this situation is normal," William replied with a small smile. "But the bond between guardian and wolf has always been special. Your healing energy has accelerated their development, created a connection that would typically take months or years to form." A thought occurred to Eleanor, sending a chill down her spine. "The villagers, they were hunting me when I fled into the forest. If I return—" "You will not return," Ethan stated firmly. "Your place is here now at Blackwood Manor. As guardian, as pack member." His blue eyes held hers. "As my mate when the time is right." Eleanor felt herself flush under his intense gaze. "I barely know you," she protested weakly. "Time will remedy that," he replied with unexpected gentleness. "The mate bond does not demand immediate consummation, only acknowledgement and acceptance." William cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss accommodations for Miss Grey. The East Wing has traditionally housed the Guardian Suite. It would be appropriate given the circumstances." Ethan nodded. "See to it, old friend, and arrange for proper clothing and necessities." He turned back to Eleanor. "I hope you will join me for dinner this evening. We have much to discuss about your role here and about the future of our alliance." Eleanor's head was spinning with the rapid changes in her circumstances. Hours ago, she had been a village outcast, fleeing for her life. Now she stood in the heart of Blackwood territory, acknowledged as a guardian, as pack, as the potential mate to the Alpha himself. "This is a lot to process," she admitted. "Indeed," William agreed sympathetically. Destiny rarely arrives at a convenient moment, my dear. A commotion in the corridor outside drew their attention. Captain Hart burst into the study, his expression urgent. Alpha, we have a situation at the southern perimeter. Multiple intruders detected crossing onto Blackwood land. Ethan's demeanor shifted instantly from potential suitor to warrior chief. Details. At least a dozen men heavily armed, Hart reported crisply. Not hunters. Their movements suggest military training. Eleanor felt a chill of premonition. The villagers, she said, they must have followed my trail. Ethan's expression darkened. No village hunting party moves with military precision. He turned to Hart. Full security protocol. I want every available guard on alert. No one approaches the manor without my direct authorization. As Hart departed to carry out his orders, Ethan turned to Eleanor. It seems your arrival has stirred more than one hornet's nest. Stay close to William. The East Wing is secure with limited access points. I should help, Eleanor protested. If people are injured, your safety is paramount. Ethan cut her off. The guardian gift is too valuable to risk in an unknown confrontation. William placed a gentle hand on Eleanor's arm. He's right, my dear. Your training has not even begun. Until you learn to control your power to direct it with precision, you could do more harm than good in a chaotic situation. Eleanor wanted to argue further, but the logic of their position was undeniable. She had no combat training, no experience with her newly awakened abilities beyond the instinctive healing of the wolf pups. Very well, she conceded reluctantly, but if anyone is seriously injured, I want to be informed immediately. Ethan's expression softened slightly. Your compassion does you credit. I will send word when the situation is resolved. His gaze lingered on her face for a moment longer than necessary. Be safe, Guardian. As he strode from the room, his powerful frame radiating lethal purpose, Eleanor felt that strange tugging in her chest again. The mate bond still forming, still tentative, but undeniably real. Come, William said gently. Let us get you settled while the Alpha does what he does best. Which is what exactly, Eleanor asked as they left the study, the three wolf pups trailing obediently behind them. William's weathered face creased in a smile that carried both pride and sadness. Protecting what's his, my dear, at any cost. As they made their way through the ancient corridors of Blackwood Manor, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into a story far larger and more complex than she could yet comprehend. Her grandfather's journal had hinted at decades of conflict, of bloodshed and betrayal that had severed the ancient bonds between guardians and alphas. Now, through some twist of fate, she found herself at the center of forces that might either heal those ancient wounds or tear them open anew. The east wing of the manor proved to be a series of elegantly appointed rooms that looked as though they had been maintained meticulously despite decades of disuse. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting scenes of wolves and humans working in harmony, of healing rituals and protective circles. The Guardian's traditional quarters, William explained as he showed Eleanor into a spacious sitting room. No one has occupied these rooms since the last Guardian your grandfather fled with your parents 30 years ago. Eleanor ran her fingers along the spines of books that filled floor-to-ceiling shelves along one wall. All these belonged to my family. To generations of Greys, William confirmed. Journals, grimoires, histories of your lineage and its connection to the Blackwood Pack. He gestured to a door on the far side of the room. Through there you'll find your personal chambers. I took the liberty of having fresh linens prepared and appropriate clothing will be delivered shortly. Eleanor felt overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding her. After years of living in a simple cabin with the barest necessities, the luxury of the Guardian suite seemed almost obscene. This is too much, she protested weakly. William's expression grew serious. It is exactly what you deserve, what your bloodline has earned through centuries of service and sacrifice. He moved to a small table where a tea service had been arranged. Now, while we wait for news from the perimeter, perhaps it's time I began your education in earnest. He poured 2 cups of steaming tea, handing one to Eleanor. The Guardian gift manifests differently in each generation, shaped by the individual's character and the needs of their time. He gestured to the 3 wolf pups who had settled on a luxurious rug before the fireplace. Your particular manifestation appears to be exceptionally powerful healing energy with a specific affinity for wolves. Eleanor sipped the fragrant tea, allowing its warmth to soothe her frayed nerves. Why now? Why did the power awaken today, after 22 years of dormancy? William settled into an armchair with the comfortable ease of an old man who had earned his rest. The gift responds to need to desperate circumstances. Your desire to save those pups was the catalyst, but the power has always been within you waiting. Like a muscle that hadn't been exercised, Eleanor suggested. Precisely, William nodded approvingly. And like any muscle, it will grow stronger with use, more precise with training. He set his teacup down. But there is something you should know, something Marcus may not have had the chance to warn you about. The serious tone of his voice made Eleanor tense. What is it? The guardian gift has two faces, William explained. Creation and destruction, healing and harm. They are two sides of the same coin, inseparable and equally powerful. Eleanor thought of the golden light that had flowed from her hands, bringing life and strength to the dying wolf pups. I don't understand. How could healing energy cause harm? What heals can also hurt when directed differently, William replied. The same energy that knits tissue can tear it apart. The power that strengthens a weakened heart can stop a healthy one. His blue eyes held hers steadily. As your abilities grow, you must learn to control not just the healing aspect, but also its destructive counterpart. A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. Has this happened before? Have guardians lost control? William's expression grew somber. There are stories, ancient tales of guardians whose grief or rage twisted their gift into a weapon. It is rare, but possible. He leaned forward. This is why training is essential. This is why the balance between guardian and alpha has always been crucial. The mate bond, Eleanor said softly, beginning to understand. It's not just tradition or a preference. It's a safeguard. For both parties, William confirmed, the alpha's strength is tempered by the guardian's compassion. The guardian's power is grounded by the alpha's stability. He smiled slightly. Your grandfather and Ethan's father maintained that balance for many years as friends rather than mates. Different but effective. Eleanor was about to ask more when the sitting room door burst open. Captain Hart stood in the doorway, his uniform torn and bloodied, his expression grim. We need the healer, he said without preamble. The alpha is down. We need the healer. The alpha is down. The words struck Eleanor like physical blows. She was on her feet before conscious thought could form, the teacup falling forgotten from her hand to shatter on the hardwood floor. What happened? William demanded, rising with surprising agility for a man his age. Ambush, Hart replied tersely. Professional, military-grade weapons with silver ammunition. His gaze shifted to Eleanor, assessment mixed with desperate hope. Can you help him? Eleanor was already moving toward the door. Take me to him. The three wolf pups followed, their young bodies tense with shared anxiety. Even at their accelerated stage of development, they were too young for battle, but their instinct to protect both their alpha and their guardian overrode caution. As they hurried through the manor's ancient corridors, William kept pace beside Eleanor despite his years. Remember what I told you about balance, he counseled, his voice low. In moments of crisis, emotion can overwhelm control. Your grandfather once told me, the greatest power of age is the ability to remain calm when youth would panic. That wisdom may serve you now. Hart led them swiftly through corridors that seemed endless, down staircases worn smooth by centuries of use, and finally into what appeared to be a medical facility housed in the manor's lowest level. Modern equipment stood alongside ancient stone walls, the marriage of tradition and innovation that seemed to define the Blackwood legacy. Ethan lay on a treatment table, his powerful body unnaturally still. His shirt had been cut away, revealing a torso mapped with old battle scars, and now 3 fresh wounds that leaked blood the color of burgundy wine. The distinctive smell of silver poisoning hung in the air, acrid and wrong. A doctor in surgical scrubs looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from professional detachment to confusion at the sight of Eleanor. Who is this? I need space to work, not spectators. She's the guardian. William said the simple statement, carrying enough weight that the doctor stepped back automatically. Eleanor moved to Ethan's side, assessing the wounds with eyes that suddenly seemed able to see beneath skin and muscle to the damage beneath. 3 silver bullets still lodged in his body, one in his shoulder, one in his chest, perilously close to his heart, and one in his abdomen. The silver was spreading its poison through his system, with every heartbeat weakening the extraordinary healing ability that was his birthright as Alpha. He's dying, she said softly. The knowledge came not from medical training, but from some deeper instinct awakened with her power. "Can you save him?" Hart asked, naked concern replacing his usual stoic demeanor. "I can try." Eleanor placed her hands above the wound nearest Ethan's heart, the most critical of the three. "But I need everyone to step back. Give me space." As the others retreated to the edges of the room, Eleanor closed her eyes and focused on the energy within her. The golden warmth that had saved the wolf pups seemed reluctant at first, exhausted from her earlier healing of James Wilson. But as she thought of Ethan, of the connection forming between them, of the ancient alliance between their bloodlines, of the future that might yet be possible, the power responded, flowing through her in a wave of brilliant heat. Her hands began to glow, the light stronger and more focused than before. She could feel the bullet beneath her palms, the foreign metal poisoning Ethan's powerful body. With newfound precision, she directed her energy to encapsulate the silver to neutralize its toxic effects, while simultaneously beginning to repair the damaged tissue around it. "The bullet has to come out," she said, her voice distant, even to her own ears, as she maintained her focus on the healing energy. "I can contain the poison, but not while the source remains." The doctor hesitated only briefly before moving forward with surgical tools. Working with careful precision, he extracted the first bullet from Ethan's chest as Eleanor's power created a protective barrier around the silver, preventing it from causing further damage during its removal. They repeated the process with the remaining two bullets, Eleanor's golden energy guiding the doctor's hands to the exact location of each projectile. As the final bullet was removed, she poured her healing power fully into Ethan's body, repairing torn muscle and blood vessels, neutralizing the lingering silver poisoning, restoring his natural strength. The effort drained her more severely than she had anticipated. By the time the last wound closed beneath her glowing hands, Eleanor was swaying on her feet, her vision tunneling to a narrow point focused solely on Ethan's face. She saw his eyelids flutter, saw the moment consciousness returned his arctic blue eyes, and focusing first with confusion and then with laser-sharp recognition on her face. His lips moved, forming her name, though no sound emerged. Then darkness claimed her, and Eleanor knew nothing more. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. The softness of expensive sheets against her skin, the warm weight of a small body curled against her side, amber she realized without opening her eyes. The sound of a fire crackling in a hearth. The scent of pine and leather and wilderness. Eleanor opened her eyes to find herself in an unfamiliar bedroom, spacious and elegant, without being ostentatious. A large four-poster bed dominated the space, and windows revealed the deep purple of twilight outside. How long had she been unconscious? 3 hours, came a deep voice from beside the bed, answering her unspoken question. "William says it's normal after a healing of that magnitude, especially for one so newly awakened to their power." Eleanor turned her head to see Ethan Blackwood seated in a chair beside the bed, his powerful frame looking somehow too large for the antique furniture. He had changed into a simple black t-shirt that clung to his muscular torso, showing no evidence of the grievous wounds that had nearly claimed his life hours before. "You should be resting," she said, her voice scratchy from sleep. "Silver poisoning takes time to fully dissipate, even with healing." A small smile touched Ethan's lips. "I am Alpha. We heal quickly." The smile faded, replaced by an intensity that seemed to reach into Eleanor's very soul. "You saved my life, as you would have saved mine," she replied, knowing the truth of it even as she spoke. Ethan leaned forward, his blue eyes holding hers. "What you did, extracting silver bullets, is advanced healing, even for experienced guardians." William was astounded. Eleanor pushed herself to a sitting position, careful not to disturb Amber, who slept peacefully beside her. "Where are Midnight and Frost?" "Just outside the door," Ethan replied, "along with half a dozen of my best guards. The manor is on full lockdown." Memory of the attack returned in a rush. "The intruders, professional mercenaries," Ethan confirmed grimly. "Not villagers. These men had military training and specialized knowledge about werewolf physiology. They knew exactly where to wait, exactly when I would be passing through that section of the perimeter. They were tipped off," Eleanor said, the pieces falling into place. "Someone inside the pack betrayed you." "So it would seem." Ethan's expression hardened. "Hart is conducting a full investigation. In the meantime, security has been doubled throughout the estate." Eleanor absently stroked Amber's fur, drawing comfort from the small wolf's presence. Do you have suspicions about who might have betrayed you? Ethan was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some middle distance. Victoria left the estate shortly after our confrontation. Her car was seen heading toward the Stone family compound. You think she's involved? The question felt almost unnecessary. Victoria's fury at being displaced had been palpable, her threats explicit. I think, Ethan said carefully, that the timing is suspicious. But the Stones are a powerful ally, one the pack cannot afford to alienate without concrete evidence. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Politics has always been as much a part of being alpha as the physical strength or the bloodline. Eleanor could hear the weariness behind his words, the weight of responsibility he carried. What happens now? Now, came William's voice from the doorway. We begin your training in earnest. The elderly advisor entered the room carrying a leather-bound book that looked ancient enough to crumble at a touch. The attackers will regroup, strategize. We must use this time to prepare. He placed the book on the bedside table, its cover embossed with the same crescent symbol that marked Eleanor's wrist. The Guardian's Grimoire. Every Grey who has served as Guardian has added to its pages, recording their discoveries, their triumphs, their failures. Eleanor reached for the book with reverent fingers, feeling a connection to her ancestors as she touched the worn leather. My grandfather's writings would be in here, William nodded, along with your great-grandmother's and 7 generations before her. The collective wisdom of your bloodline preserved for moments exactly like this one. Ethan rose from his chair, his movement drawing Eleanor's gaze like a magnet. I'll leave you to begin your studies. There are pack matters that require my attention. He hesitated, something vulnerable briefly visible behind his alpha confidence. Dinner later, there is much we still need to discuss. I'd like that, Eleanor replied, surprised by how genuinely she meant it. After Ethan departed, William settled into the chair he had vacated, his wise old eyes studying Eleanor with a mix of pride and concern. How do you feel, and please be honest? There's no room for false bravado when dealing with powers of this magnitude. Eleanor considered the question seriously. Tired but not exhausted, and different, as if something fundamental has shifted inside me. She touched her birthmark, which seemed to pulse faintly beneath her fingertips. The power feels more accessible now, closer to the surface. That's to be expected, William confirmed. Each significant use of the Guardian gift strengthens the connection, makes the power more readily available. His expression grew serious. But that increased accessibility comes with risks. The more powerful you become, the more critical control becomes. He opened the grimoire, carefully turning yellowed pages covered in different handwritings until he came to a specific entry. Your great-grandmother, Eleanor, whom you were named after, wrote this passage in 1940. I think you'll find it relevant. Eleanor leaned forward to read the elegant script. The Guardian's power is neither good nor evil, but rather a force of nature that responds to intention. I have learned through bitter experience that rage and fear can twist healing energy into something destructive beyond imagination. During the incident at Black Creek, my attempt to heal turned to harm when panic overwhelmed my control. 3 pack members died before I could master myself again. Let this serve as warning to those who follow. Emotional discipline is not merely advisable, but essential. The stronger the Guardian grows, the more vital this control becomes. A chill ran through Eleanor as she finished reading. I could hurt people, she whispered, the realization settling like lead in her stomach. If I lose control, any great power carries equal potential for harm and healing, William said gently. This is why Guardians traditionally underwent years of training before fully exercising their gifts. Years that we don't have, Eleanor pointed out. If Victoria is behind the attack, if there's truly a traitor within the pack. Indeed, William agreed grimly, which is why we must accelerate your training, focus on the essentials. He tapped the grimoire, beginning with the fundamental principle of Guardian magic balance. For the next several hours, William guided Eleanor through exercises described in the grimoire, techniques for centering her energy, for controlling the flow of power, for maintaining emotional equilibrium, even under duress. Some felt instinctively right, as if her body remembered what her conscious mind had never known. The years I spent with your grandfather weren't wasted, William remarked, as Eleanor successfully completed a particularly challenging exercise. Marcus was one of the most disciplined Guardians I ever knew. He could focus his power with surgical precision. You miss him, Eleanor said, recognizing the shadow of old grief in William's eyes. Every day, the old man admitted. The older one gets, the more ghosts one accumulates. The trick is learning to live with them, to draw strength from their memory rather than being haunted by it. He smiled faintly. Another benefit of age that the young often overlook. Experience teaches us how to carry our losses without being crushed by them. As dusk deepened into true night outside the windows, William finally closed the grimoire. Enough for today. You need to conserve your strength, especially after such a significant healing. Eleanor rubbed her eyes, feeling the mental fatigue of concentrated study. There's so much to learn and so little time. Rome wasn't built in a day, William reminded her with a gentle smile. Neither is a guardian fully formed in an afternoon. He rose stiffly from his chair, his age showing in the careful way he straightened. I've taken the liberty of having suitable clothing delivered for your dinner with the Alpha. You'll find it in the wardrobe. As he moved toward the door, Eleanor called after him. William, thank you for everything. The old man paused, his weathered face softening. I made a promise to your grandfather, Eleanor, that if any of his bloodline ever returned to Blackwood territory, I would protect and guide them as he would have done. His blue eyes twinkled. Besides, I've waited 30 years to see a guardian working alongside an alpha again. I wouldn't miss it for the world. After William departed, Eleanor took a long, hot shower in the adjoining bathroom, letting the steaming water wash away the lingering exhaustion of the day's events. Amber waited patiently on a bath mat, her golden eyes tracking Eleanor's movements with the unwavering loyalty that still seemed astonishing in one so young. The wardrobe yielded clothing that fit Eleanor, perfectly simple but elegant pieces that spoke of quality without ostentation. She chose a soft sweater in deep forest green and dark jeans, practical yet flattering. Her village clothing had been practical out of necessity. These garments were practical by design, accommodating both style and functionality. As she dressed, Eleanor caught sight of her reflection in a full-length mirror. The young woman who looked back at her seemed simultaneously familiar and strange, the same features she had seen every day of her life, but now animated by a new confidence, a sense of belonging that had always eluded her in the village. A knock at the bedroom door announced a young woman who introduced herself as Lily, assigned to guide Eleanor to dinner. The Alpha awaits you in the private dining room, Miss Grey. Eleanor followed Lily through corridors she hadn't yet explored, Amber trotting at her heels while Midnight and Frost fell into step behind them, having maintained their vigilant post outside her door. The manor seemed different in the evening hours, the ancient stones glowing warmly in lamplight, the weight of history somehow less oppressive and more comforting. The private dining room proved to be an intimate space with a table that could seat 6 but was set for only 2. A fireplace occupied one wall with windows, offering views of moonlit forests on another. Ethan stood as Eleanor entered, his composed features softening almost imperceptibly at the sight of her. You look rested, he observed, pulling out a chair for her. William tells me you have made remarkable progress already. He's a good teacher, Eleanor replied, settling into the offered seat. Patient but demanding. An accurate assessment. Ethan agreed with a small smile, taking his own seat across from her. He was the same with me after my father died, and the responsibility of Alpha fell to me before I was truly ready. Servers appeared silently, placing the first course before them, a fragrant soup that steamed invitingly. Eleanor suddenly realized she was ravenous, her body demanding fuel after the energy expended in healing. Healing depletes physical resources, Ethan said, noting her reaction to the food. You'll find your appetite increased for several days. As they ate, conversation flowed more easily than Eleanor would have expected, given the extraordinary circumstances of their meeting. Ethan spoke of his childhood at Blackwood Manor, of his father Richard, who had been a respected alpha and a close friend to Marcus Grey. He described the years after Thomas Blackwood's coup, when the pack had fractured and allies had scattered. I was only 10 when my uncle seized control. Ethan explained, his expression darkening at the memory. Too young to challenge him directly. William smuggled me out of the manor that night, hid me with trusted pack members in the mountains. How did you eventually reclaim your position? Eleanor asked, genuinely curious about the man whose fate now seemed so inexorably linked with her own. I returned on my 18th birthday, Ethan said, his voice taking on the cadence of oft-told legend. Challenged Thomas in front of the entire pack, as is our tradition. The fight lasted from sunrise to sunset. His hand unconsciously touched the scar along his jawline. I nearly lost, but in the end, right made might. Eleanor sensed there was much more to the story than this simplified version, but she didn't press. Some wounds she understood needed time before they could be fully revealed. In the pack, did they accept you immediately? Some did, Ethan acknowledged. Those who remembered my father who had suffered under Thomas's reign. Others took more convincing. Building trust is the work of years, not moments. There was wisdom in his words that belied his relatively young age. At 30, Ethan Blackwood carried the weight of responsibility and the scars of battle in equal measure. Yet there was something else there too, a capacity for compassion, for thoughtfulness, that contradicted the stereotypical image of an alpha as merely the strongest fighter. As they finished the main course, a perfectly prepared venison that Eleanor suspected had been hunted rather than purchased, Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her with those intense blue eyes. May I ask you something personal? Eleanor nodded, curious what he would want to know. Your life in that village, was it always difficult? Being different, being isolated from your true heritage. The question touched on memories Eleanor had tried to bury of loneliness so acute it had physical presence of whispers that followed her through the village streets, of doors that closed at her approach. It was challenging, she admitted. My grandfather did his best to protect me, to make me feel valued despite the villagers' suspicion. After he died, it became harder. And yet you survived, Ethan observed. More than survived, you maintained your compassion, your willingness to help others despite how they treated you. His expression held genuine admiration. That requires remarkable strength. Eleanor hadn't thought of it as strength before. Necessity, perhaps. Stubbornness, certainly. But as Ethan framed it, she allowed herself to consider that maybe there had been courage in her quiet persistence, in her refusal to become bitter, despite ample justification. Perhaps, she conceded, though it doesn't feel particularly heroic from the inside. True courage rarely does, Ethan replied. It's simply doing what must be done regardless of fear. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Hart, his expression grim as he approached the table. Forgive the intrusion, Alpha, but we've received intelligence that requires immediate attention. Ethan's demeanor shifted instantly, the relaxed dinner companion replaced by the vigilant pack leader. Report. Hart glanced briefly at Eleanor before continuing. Our sources confirm that Victoria Stone has been meeting with representatives from Shadow Syndicate, a paramilitary organization known for hunting supernatural beings. Bank transfers suggest significant funding has changed hands within the last 6 hours. Eleanor felt cold dread settle in her stomach. She's hiring mercenaries. More than mercenaries, Hart corrected grimly. Shadow Syndicate is an organization that has existed in secret for centuries, dedicated to studying, capturing, and experimenting on supernatural beings. They disguise themselves as a legitimate security firm, but their true agenda is far darker. And now they have inside information. Ethan concluded, his expression hardening. Security protocols, patrol schedules, pack hierarchy. Worse, Hart continued, they have samples of Blackwood blood, yours specifically. The bullets we recovered contain trace elements designed to target your specific DNA. Eleanor's mind raced with the implications. That's why the silver affected you so severely. It wasn't just regular ammunition. It was customized to maximize damage to your particular physiology. Ethan nodded, his expression grave. Victoria had access to my medical records as my fiancée. She must have shared that data with Shadow Syndicate researchers. He turned to Hart. Alert the pack elders. Full war footing effective immediately. As Hart departed to carry out his orders, Eleanor found herself struggling to process the escalating danger. Yesterday, she had been a village herbalist living a quiet, if lonely existence on the margins of society. Today, she was at the center of what appeared to be an imminent war between werewolves and high-tech mercenaries. I'm sorry you've been thrust into this, Ethan said, correctly interpreting her expression. This conflict has been brewing since before you arrived. Victoria's betrayal merely accelerated a confrontation that was probably inevitable. I feel responsible, Eleanor admitted. If I hadn't appeared, if the mate bond hadn't formed, then Victoria would have found another reason to betray the pack, Ethan interrupted firmly. William has suspected her of divided loyalties for months, but we lacked concrete evidence. His expression softened slightly. And I would still be without a guardian, without the balance that the pack has needed for 30 years. Before Eleanor could respond, the windows of the dining room exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. The concussive force of an explosion rocked the manor, sending dishes crashing to the floor as the lights flickered and died. Ethan was on his feet instantly, placing himself between Eleanor and the shattered windows. "We're under attack," he stated grimly, already reaching for the emergency communication device at his belt. Hart reports security breach in the east wing. The three wolf pups had leapt to attention, their young bodies tense and alert, hackles raised, as they formed a protective circle around Eleanor. Despite their age, their instinct to defend was fully developed, their loyalty absolute. "We need to move," Ethan said, taking Eleanor's arm. "The safe room is 3 levels down." But as they turned toward the door, it burst open to reveal William Reed, his elderly frame moving with surprising speed, his face ashen. "It's a diversion," he gasped. "The main attack is coming through the tunnels beneath the archive. They're after the grimoire." Ethan's expression darkened. "How many wekawai?" "At least 20, William replied, professional, well-armed." His gaze shifted to Eleanor. "They know about the Guardian. She's a primary target." Eleanor felt a cold certainty settle over her. "Victoria told them everything. About me, about the mate bond, about the Guardian gift." "Knowledge is their true weapon," William agreed grimly. "Shadow Syndicate doesn't just hunt supernatural beings, they study them, weaponize their abilities." Ethan's decision was immediate and definitive. "Eleanor goes to the panic room with you, William. Hart and I will handle the intruders." "No," Eleanor said firmly, surprising herself with her certainty. "The grimoire is my legacy, my responsibility, and my gift might be the only advantage against weapons designed specifically to harm werewolves." "You've barely begun your training," Ethan protested. "Using your power in combat is completely different from controlled healing." "Sometimes the best training happens in the field," Eleanor countered, remembering her grandfather's words about learning under pressure. "Besides, the mate bond works both ways. You've been protecting me since I arrived. Now it's my turn to protect you." Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Respect mingling with concern, and beneath it all, the growing connection between them that seemed to strengthen with each passing hour. "Together then," he said finally, "as it should be, Alpha and Guardian, as in the old days." William nodded, his weathered face showing both pride and worry. "The tunnel entrance is hidden behind the north bookcase in the archive. If we hurry, we might intercept them before they reach the manor proper." As they moved swiftly through darkened corridors, lit only by emergency lighting, Eleanor felt the Guardian power stirring within her, responding to the imminent threat. The golden warmth flowed through her veins, but now it carried a new quality, an edge like lightning before it strikes power, waiting to be unleashed. She thought of her great-grandmother's warning in the grimoire about how easily healing energy could turn destructive when fueled by fear or rage. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now faced exactly the kind of high-stress situation most likely to trigger such a transformation. Control, she reminded herself as they descended a narrow stone staircase that looked older than America itself. Balance. The archive room appeared undisturbed when they entered, its precious books still lining the walls, the portrait of the First Alliance still hanging proudly above the fireplace. But Eleanor could feel a wrongness in the air, a disturbance that set her teeth on edge. "They're close," she whispered, the words emerging as certainty rather than speculation. "I can sense them." William moved to the north bookcase, his fingers finding a hidden mechanism that caused the entire structure to swing inward, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. "These passages were built during the Revolutionary War," he explained quickly. "Escape routes, supply lines, hidden ways to move pack members during times of persecution." Ethan's enhanced senses were on full alert, his body tense with predatory readiness. "Multiple heartbeats," he confirmed, "approaching fast." "Stand behind me," Eleanor said, stepping forward as the Guardian power built within her, making her skin glow faintly in the dimness. "Whatever happens, whatever you see, remember that I'm still me." Before either man could respond, the first of the Shadow Syndicate operatives emerged from the tunnel entrance, weapon raised. He wore tactical gear in matte black, his face obscured by a high-tech mask that likely provided both protection and enhanced vision. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She raised her hands, and the golden light that had healed wolf pups in silver wounds now surged forward in a directed wave of pure energy. It struck the operative directly in the chest, lifting him off his feet and throwing him backward into the tunnel, with enough force that Eleanor heard the impact of body against stone, even from 20 feet away. "More coming," Ethan warned, already shifting into a combat stance. "I know," Eleanor replied, her voice strangely calm despite the battle unfolding before them. "I can feel them." As the next wave of operatives emerged, Eleanor felt the guardian power responding to her will with growing precision. She focused the energy into concentrated bursts, disabling weapons, creating barriers of golden light that deflected bullets, targeting pressure points that would incapacitate without killing. Beside her, Ethan moved with lethal grace, his human form enhanced by alpha strength and speed. He avoided using his full werewolf shift, a tactical decision Eleanor realized to maintain precision and control in the confined space. William had positioned himself protectively near the grimoire, his elderly frame belying the fierce determination in his blue eyes. The three wolf pups circled him, their young bodies the last line of defense for the precious repository of guardian knowledge. "They're retreating," Ethan announced after several minutes of intense combat. The tunnel entrance showed no further movement, and the sounds of battle had receded deeper into the passageway. "No," Eleanor contradicted, her heightened senses detecting something the others had missed. "They're regrouping, and something else is coming." She could feel it, a presence darker and colder than the human operatives. Something that made her guardian power recoil in instinctive recognition of its antithesis. William's face paled. "Victoria," he breathed, the name emerging as both identification and curse. The temperature in the archive seemed to drop several degrees. The shadows in the tunnel entrance deepened, coalesced, and then Victoria Stone stepped into view. But this was not the perfectly coiffed socialite who had dismissed dying wolf pups with casual cruelty. This Victoria moved with inhuman grace, her pale skin now bearing an ashen quality, her platinum hair darkened to the color of midnight. Her fingers had elongated into claws, and when she smiled, her teeth were sharp as razors. "How lovely," she purred, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance that made the air itself shiver. "The Alpha, the Guardian, and the old advisor all gathered to welcome me. How considerate." Eleanor felt Ethan tense beside her, shock and betrayal radiating from him in waves. "What are you?" he demanded. Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass. "I am what I have always been, Ethan darling. The culmination of the Stone family's true legacy." Her form seemed to shift and change as she spoke, becoming less human with each passing moment. "Did you really think we allied with the Blackwoods out of respect? We've been infiltrating werewolf packs for generations, gathering DNA, studying weaknesses, preparing for the day when we could claim what was rightfully ours." "Shadow Syndicate," William said, his voice heavy with realization. "The Stones founded it." "Clever old man," Victoria acknowledged with a mocking bow. "Always one step ahead of everyone else, but not quite far enough this time." Her gaze shifted to Eleanor, cold calculation replacing mockery. "And you, little guardian, such a convenient catalyst for my plans. I should thank you for accelerating my timeline." Eleanor felt the mate bond with Ethan pulse stronger, responding to the imminent threat. The guardian power within her surged, eager to be unleashed against this unnatural creature that represented everything her bloodline had sworn to oppose. "This ends now," Ethan declared, his voice carrying the full weight of alpha authority. "You have betrayed the trust of the pack, violated ancient covenants, brought enemies onto our land. For these crimes, there is only one sentence." Victoria's smile widened, revealing more teeth than should have been possible in a human mouth. "Oh, I quite agree, my almost husband. This does end now." She raised her hands, dark energy beginning to coalesce around her fingers, crackling with malevolent power. "But not in the way you imagine." The corrupted energy shot toward Ethan with lethal intent, but Eleanor was faster. She threw herself between them, her hands raised, golden light meeting darkness in a collision that sent shockwaves through the ancient archive. Books flew from shelves, artifacts toppled from their stands, and the very foundations of the manor seemed to tremble. "Foolish girl," Victoria hissed, her beautiful face contorting with rage. "You have no idea what you're facing. The Stone family has been breeding with shadow creatures for centuries, perfecting what your kind would call abomination." Eleanor felt her power straining against Victoria's darkness, the two forces evenly matched for the moment. "You're right," she admitted, her voice steady despite the tremendous effort required to maintain the barrier. "I don't know everything I'm facing, but I know what I'm protecting." She glanced back briefly at Ethan, at William, at the three wolf pups who watched with intelligent eyes far too wise for their age. Family, pack, home. The concepts had been theoretical to her just days ago. Now they were real, tangible, worth fighting for. How touching, Victoria sneered, increasing the pressure of her attack. The dark energy began to push Eleanor's golden barrier back inch by inch. But sentiment won't save you from what's coming. As if on cue, more Shadow Syndicate operatives poured from the tunnel, these armed with weapons that looked more like scientific instruments than conventional firearms. Eleanor recognized the threat. These weren't meant to kill, but to capture, to take specimens back to laboratories for study and experimentation. Ethan moved to intercept them, his body flowing into partial shift claws, extending muscles bulging with preternatural strength, eyes blazing with alpha power. But there were too many, and the confines of the archive limited his movements. William stood his ground before the grimoire, brandishing his walking staff with surprising skill. "I may be old," he called out, his voice carrying the confidence of decades of experience, "but I'm far from helpless." He knocked aside the first operative who approached him with a precision that spoke of military training long ago. Eleanor felt her strength beginning to flag as Victoria pressed her advantage, the dark energy creeping closer. The Shadow Syndicate operatives were gradually overwhelming Ethan through sheer numbers, and William, despite his bravery, was no match for trained killers half his age. A cold clarity settled over Eleanor. This was the moment her great-grandmother had written about in the grimoire, the point where healing and destruction balanced on a knife's edge, where intention determined which aspect of the guardian power would manifest. She thought of the village that had feared and rejected her, of Victoria's casual cruelty toward dying wolf pups, of her parents murdered by Thomas Blackwood for the crime of carrying guardian blood, of all the harm done by those who feared difference, who sought to destroy what they couldn't control. For a heartbeat, Eleanor felt herself sliding toward darkness, toward using her power to harm rather than heal. The golden light surrounding her hands took on a deeper, more dangerous hue. Then she thought of Marcus Grey, of his insistence that true strength lay in knowledge and experience, not in muscle or tooth or claw. Of William Reed, who had kept faith for 30 years, waiting for a guardian to return. Of Ethan fighting to protect his pack against overwhelming odds. And she remembered what her grandfather had taught her from her earliest days: balance in all things. "You're right about one thing, Victoria," Eleanor said, her voice carrying a new resonance that made the air vibrate with power. "This does end now." With a sudden shift in her focus, Eleanor redirected her energy. Instead of meeting Victoria's attack head-on, she channeled her power around it, creating a vortex that began to draw in the darkness rather than repel it. It was a technique described in the grimoire, one she had only glimpsed during her brief study, the purification spiral meant to cleanse corruption rather than destroy it. Victoria's eyes widened in shock as her dark energy began to dissipate, drawn into Eleanor's golden vortex and transformed. "What are you doing?" she snarled, increasing her output desperately. "Stop this! I'm not destroying you, Victoria," Eleanor replied, maintaining the spiral with grim determination. "I'm healing you, purging the corruption that has twisted your bloodline for generations." The darkness flowing from Victoria's hands grew erratic, weakening as more and more was drawn into Eleanor's purification spiral. The Shadow Syndicate operatives faltered, many dropping their weapons as the psychic connection to their leader was disrupted. William, seeing his opportunity, lunged for the grimoire. "Get back!" he shouted to Ethan and Eleanor. "I'll lead them away from you." Before anyone could stop him, the elderly advisor was moving with surprising speed toward the tunnel entrance. The ancient book clutched to his chest. Several operatives turned to pursue him, recognizing the value of what he carried. "William, no," Ethan called, breaking free from his attackers and trying to intercept the old man. But William was already disappearing into the tunnel the grimoire held high. "For the Alliance," he cried, his voice echoing from the stone passageway. "For the Blackwoods and the Greys." A moment later, a deafening explosion rocked the foundations of the manor. The tunnel entrance collapsed in a shower of stone and dust, sealing the passage completely. "William!" Eleanor screamed, her concentration shattered by the shock of what had just happened. In that moment of distraction, Victoria struck. A blade of pure darkness slashed across the space between them, catching Eleanor across the chest and sending her crashing back into a bookshelf. Pain blossomed hot and immediate as blood soaked through her sweater. "Eleanor!" Ethan roared, his partial shift completing in an instant. The alpha werewolf that now stood where the man had been was massive, nearly 8 feet tall on his hind legs, with midnight black fur and eyes that blazed like blue fire. Victoria turned to face this new threat, her own transformation accelerating in response. Her elegant form, elongated skin hardening into scales, face reshaping into something reptilian and ancient. The Stone family made pacts with forces older than your kind, wolf. She hissed, her voice barely recognizable now. We have evolved beyond humanity while you cling to fur and fang like the animals you are. Through the haze of pain, Eleanor forced herself to focus. William's sacrifice couldn't be in vain. The purification spiral had been working. She had seen the human woman beneath the corruption glimpse the possibility of healing, even what seemed monstrous. But Victoria in her current form was too powerful, too corrupted for Eleanor to cleanse alone. She needed help, needed balance. Ethan, she called, her voice weak but determined. The mate bond, we need to complete it. The massive werewolf's head turned toward her, those eerily intelligent blue eyes fixed on her face. Even in full shift, Ethan understood. With a growl that vibrated through the stone floor, he moved to her side, placing one massive clawed hand over her wounded chest. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through Eleanor's entire body. The mate bond that had been forming gradually since their first meeting suddenly crystallized, snapping into place with the force of destiny fulfilled. Power flowed between them, his strength into her healing into him, creating a circuit of energy that grew with each heartbeat. Victoria sensed the danger too late. No, she shrieked, launching herself at the pair. But the shield that materialized around Eleanor and Ethan wasn't golden now, nor was it the midnight blue of alpha power. It was both and neither, a shimmering aurora of energy that repelled Victoria's attack with such force that she was thrown back against the far wall of the archive. Eleanor rose to her feet, her wound already healing, as Ethan's alpha energy augmented her own. The massive werewolf stood beside her, their bodies connected by visible currents of power that arced between them like living lightning. William knew, Eleanor said softly, understanding blooming even as power surged through her. He knew the mate bond would complete when we were both in mortal danger. That's why he sacrificed himself to give us this chance. Victoria struggled to her feet, her transformed body showing signs of injury for the first time. Kill them, she commanded the remaining Shadow Syndicate operatives. Kill them now. But the mercenaries hesitated, seeing their leader weakened and facing something beyond their experience or training. One by one, they began to retreat toward the collapsed tunnel, seeking alternate escape routes. Your allies are abandoning you, Victoria, Ethan said, his voice deeper and more resonant in werewolf form, but still intelligible. Surrender and you might yet live. Victoria's laughter held an edge of madness. Surrender to become your pet, your specimen. I am the culmination of 5 centuries of breeding, of sacrifice, of power beyond your comprehension. Her body contorted further, approaching something less mammalian and more insectoid with each passing second. I will tear your precious mate apart before your eyes. She lunged again, but this time Eleanor was ready. Drawing on Ethan's strength through the completed mate bond, she shaped her guardian power into something new, neither purely healing nor purely destructive, but transformative. As Victoria's corrupted form collided with their shared shield, Eleanor pushed her power outward, surrounding their attacker in a cocoon of purifying energy. Victoria screamed, the sound shifting from rage to something approaching anguish as the transformation was reversed, scales receding, limbs, reshaping features, returning to human. Within moments, Victoria Stone knelt before them, restored to her human form, her perfect beauty now marred by exhaustion and defeat. You can't undo what I am, she whispered, her voice hoarse. The darkness is in my blood, my bones, my very cells. Perhaps, Eleanor acknowledged, maintaining the purifying field around Victoria. But you have a choice now. The corruption doesn't have to define you. Victoria's laugh was bitter. Choice, what do you know of choice's guardian, you, with your destined mate, your predefined role, your neat little place in the natural order? She shook her head. Some of us have to make our own fate, carve our own path. And yours led you here, Ethan observed, his massive form beginning to shift back toward human as the immediate danger passed. To betrayal and defeat. This time, Victoria conceded. She looked up at Eleanor with cold blue eyes that held no surrender, only calculation. But time is the one advantage my kind has always had over yours, Wolf King. We are very, very patient. Before either of them could respond, Victoria slammed her fist against the device concealed in her clothing. A blinding flash filled the archive, followed by a concussive wave that knocked both Eleanor and Ethan backward. When their vision cleared, Victoria was gone. "She'll be back," Ethan said grimly, now fully returned to human form, his clothing torn and disheveled from the shift. "Yes," Eleanor agreed, "but next time we'll be ready." They stood together amid the ruins of the archive, the mate bond humming between them like a perfectly tuned instrument. The three wolf pups emerged from behind toppled bookshelves where they had taken cover during the final confrontation, their intelligent eyes assessing the situation before padding over to circle their bonded humans. "William," Eleanor said softly, turning toward the collapsed tunnel entrance. "He knew, didn't he, that his sacrifice would force the mate bond to complete?" Ethan nodded, grief etching new lines in his face. "William Reed was the wisest man I've ever known. He understood sacrifice in a way that only those who have lived a full life can." He placed a gentle hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "He would be proud of what you did here today. Not just the power you wielded, but the balance you maintained." Eleanor felt tears threatening but held them back. There would be time for mourning later. "What happens now?" Ethan surveyed the destruction around them. "Now we rebuild. We strengthen the pack, prepare for Victoria's eventual return." His hand moved from her shoulder to gently cup her cheek. "And we honor the alliance that has been restored between Alpha and Guardian." The mate bond pulsed between them, no longer a tentative connection, but a fully formed link that felt as natural as breathing. Eleanor leaned into his touch, drawing comfort from the connection that destiny had engineered between their bloodlines centuries ago. "I still have so much to learn," she said, thinking of the grimoire now buried beneath tons of stone and earth. "We both do," Ethan replied, "but we'll learn together. That's what the mate bond is truly about: balance, partnership, strength, shared rather than hoarded." From somewhere deep in the manor, alarm bells began to ring. The sounds of combat echoed from distant corridors as the pack dealt with the remaining Shadow Syndicate forces. "Our first lesson begins now, it seems," Eleanor said, straightening her shoulders as the guardian power stirred within her, once more ready to heal those who would be injured in the ongoing battle. Ethan's smile held pride, admiration, and something deeper that made the mate bond sing between them. "Together, then." "Together," Eleanor agreed as they moved as one toward the door, the three wolf pups following in perfect formation. In the darkness beyond the collapsed tunnel, the grimoire lay open, its ancient pages somehow unmarked by the explosion that had claimed William Reed's life. The book's pages ruffled in a breeze that shouldn't have existed underground, turning slowly until they settled on an entry written in a firm, steady hand nearly 50 years earlier. "The greatest strength of the Guardian is not healing, nor is it destruction. It is transformation, the ability to take what is and reshape it into what could be. In this, we are not so different from time itself, which changes all things eventually. The wise Guardian doesn't fight against this flow, but works within it, guiding rather than forcing, suggesting rather than demanding. When my time comes, as it must, for all living things, I hope to face it, knowing that I have passed on not just knowledge, but wisdom. For knowledge can be written in books, but wisdom must be lived to be understood. To you who reads these words after me, trust in the balance, trust in the bond, and above all, trust in yourself." Marcus Grey, Guardian. In the Great Hall of Blackwood Manor 70 years later, Eleanor Grey completed her story, her lined face illuminated by firelight, her amber eyes still bright despite the decades that had passed. "William's sacrifice gave us the time we needed," she told her rapt audience, "to complete the mate bond, to discover our combined strength, to begin the work of rebuilding what had been broken between our bloodlines." Beside her sat Ethan Blackwood, his once dark hair now silver, but his arctic blue eyes no less piercing than they had been in his youth. His hand rested over hers, the mate bond between them, as strong now as it had been the day it fully formed. "Victoria returned, of course," Ethan added, 3 times over the decades, each confrontation more dangerous than the last. "But each time we were stronger too," Eleanor continued, "because that's what experience gives you, not just knowledge, but wisdom. The ability to see patterns, to anticipate, to understand the difference between what is urgent and what is important." At their feet lay 3 massive wolves, Midnight Frost and Amber, though fully grown and formidable, yet still devoted to their guardian and Alpha. Their offspring had become the foundation of a new breed of wolves, ones who carried both the strength of the Blackwood line and the healing magic of the Greys. And so you see, Eleanor concluded, her gaze moving over the young faces gathered around her. Some human, some werewolf, all part of the extended pack that had flourished under their leadership. What seems like a curse when you're young, being different, being marked, being cast out, can reveal itself as your greatest strength when the time is right. And the things we fear most about ourselves, Ethan added, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom, often become the very things the world needs most from us. As the young pack members dispersed, carrying the story with them to share with others, Eleanor and Ethan remained by the fire, content in the companionable silence of those who had faced both triumph and tragedy together. "Do you ever wonder," Eleanor asked softly, "what would have happened if I hadn't found those pups that day?" Ethan's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I stopped asking what if a long time ago, my love. What matters is what did happen and what we built from it." Eleanor nodded, leaning against his shoulder as the fire burned low. The crescent birthmark on her wrist still showed faintly against her aged skin, a reminder of the legacy she carried and had passed on to a new generation of guardians. Outside, beyond the windows of Blackwood Manor, the Montana wilderness stretched toward distant mountains, unchanged in its fundamental nature despite the passing of decades. The cycle continued, alpha and guardian strength and healing, youth and age, each incomplete, without the other, each necessary for balance. The last guardian had found her place, her purpose, her mate, and in doing so had ensured she would not be the last after all.